Susie. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Jonathan?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for making time. I know this is a busy stretch for you, so we appreciate it at GCCM. How are things going in Rio?
Very hot. Very hot. But things are good, thankfully. Yes.
Good, good, good. Wanted to talk, of course, you're getting your master's in theology, and we can talk about that as well. But you also work with GCCM, the Global Catholic Climate Movement, as a translator, of course, full disclosure for everyone. And you're a Laudato Si animator, so there's a number of different fields or paths in which your work and like your passions have intersected with the Global Catholic Climate Movement and caring for creation. But just backing up to kind of the beginning, you grew up then, what was kind of your motivation to study this and to kind of get into this field and to live your life this way? How did your household growing up, what was that like and everything?
Well, I come from a Catholic family and from several generations of Catholic families. And I think what really made a difference with the way that our parents raised us is that both my mom and dad were concerned about us having a personal relationship with God, and not just go to church every Sunday, but to understand how the Holy Spirit would speak to our hearts and how God would reveal himself to us in the gospel. And so we always had this practice as a family to read the Bible and talk about what the reading meant to each one of us. We would also pray the rosary together. And so I grew up in that context, and also with a very Franciscan spirituality, because my father, when he was way younger, he was in the Franciscan seminary, and my mom always had a special devotion to St. Francis. So all of this really influenced me as I grew up. And when I was in my last year in high school, I got into this existential crisis because I realized, like, I knew I was very different because I always had a very solid Catholic faith while still being this young random girl with blue hair. And, I was really eccentric, I guess. And I was very concerned about the idea of like trying to choose a path after school just to guarantee myself in life. So I didn't want to choose a career, a university degree, just to fit into the system of how things are done in society. I wanted to do something that gave meaning to my life, and that just didn't give me money. So in the middle of all that, I realized that I wanted to study theology because I came from this background of always trying to understand faith in my personal life and thinking critically about faith. And so it seemed like the path to take. And then right when I was in the middle of my bachelor's degree in theology, that was when Pope Francis released Laudato Si. And all the events in the theology department for like a whole year were just about Laudato Si. So it ended up really...
Were you like, wow, this is, the stars are aligning, like this is it all makes sense now, or what did you kind of think then?
Yeah, definitely. It was so different from other documents that he had released, because whenever a pope releases a document, we study them in theology. But Laudato Si was like every event that we had, every lecture, every conference was about it. And because it relates to so many different fields in theology and the dialogue with different areas, right? And the more I read it in theology, in my theology course, the more I realized how it related to my life and the way I grew up and the way my parents helped us see the gift of creation as part of revelation of God's love, and this just this intrinsic calling of the Christian life to take care of creation. So that definitely it made me start realizing that part of my mission in theology is to help make visible this care for creation as a center part of our being disciples of Christ.
And it's so interesting that your parents were so intentional about raising, you have, how many siblings do you have?
I have 2 sisters and a brother, and I'm the
Two
youngest.
sisters. Okay, so 4 of you. So no
Yeah.
easy task for sure. No easy task with one child, but with 4, have you spoken to them at all? Why? I mean, like why that was such a big deal? Because I mean, I feel like a lot of families, they might raise their kids Catholic, but that they don't, or raise their kids Christian, whatever, any faith, but they don't, to get them into church is like great. That's an accomplishment. Like that's a lot. And to have them keep going to church and things like that, or, a Catholic school or whatever, but to really focus on that intimacy, that personal relationship is something that not every family has. So if you had a chance, like why were they so focused on that? And why did they kind of think, or why did they make that such a priority for you all?
I think my mom is the most responsible for this. She came from a Catholic charismatic renewal group, and her parents actually were one of the first couples to start a prayer group of the charismatic renewal in Brazil, and I think that made her realize through the discernment of the Holy Spirit that the most important part of her as a mother was to make sure that her children understood that God spoke personally to them, and I think that's it, because their main concern wasn't to make sure that we would be saved by going to church. Their main concern was for us to understand how we could personally relate to God and see how he reveals to us differently than to other people, because God is very personal. So I don't know. I think it was just inspired by the Holy Spirit.
And how did you mentioned also how God reveals himself through creation. Did you, how did they make sure that came across as well? And with that Franciscan charisma as well?
I think definitely through the appreciation of how beautiful creation is. And it definitely helps the fact that we grew up in Brazil, and we have, like, my dad's side of the family is from the state of Goiás, which is right in the center of Brazil. And like one of the things that we would always do as a family, all of the extended family, was to travel every year to a farm in the middle of nowhere in the northeast part of the Amazon forest. And so we always had a personal contact with nature. And because both my parents also had this special connection to St. Francis, I think it was always very natural for us to look at all this diversity that was present in our lives and to see how that spoke of God. And it is truly beautiful. I mean, there's no way for you to go to the middle of nowhere in the forest in Brazil and not be amazed and just awestruck with how diverse things are. And it's overwhelming.
Oh yeah. And they would say, we're spending time with creation, not saying, oh, like, let's go spend time with nature. There was a real intentionality with the words they use as well with your parents.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Really interesting. And then you're in high school and you're thinking, like, I want to do something that, had, I think you said meaning over money, which is a good one. I like that. I might have to try to use that. And then you thought, okay, I'll study theology, and then now you're in your master's. So what kind of happened from there with your faith journey? And at that point, you've kind of decided, okay, I'm on this path, right?
Yeah. Well, when I finished my bachelor's degree, I sort of got another existential crisis because, I was very confident with my choice in theology, because now I think it's part of me. It's part of who I am, to be a theologian. And I understand that as a central part of my mission as a Christian, as a Catholic Christian. But I realized that, well, first of all, it's very rare for a young person in Brazil and in the whole of Latin America to study theology, because you really can't make a living with it. It's one of the jokes that we say, that it's hard enough for you to want to study, but for you to study and know that you won't make money afterwards, that's theology for you. But then I realized when I finished my bachelor's degree, there were a lot of teachers telling me to do the master's. but they wanted me to do the master's for me to guarantee a way to sustain myself, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
that logic, I didn't like that logic, because
Mhm.
again, it wasn't for the meaning of doing a master's degree, for a mission, for service for the church. It was more for trying to guarantee myself in life. And so I didn't do the master's degree right after I finished the bachelor's. I lived, another thing about my background is that my father, he used to work for Petrobras, the biggest oil company in Brazil. And almost every 2 years, we would move to different cities. And we also lived in Argentina and the US. So when I finished my bachelor's degree, I really missed living in Argentina. So I decided to go back. So I spent a year just kind of trying to find something else to do with my life, having a bachelor's degree in theology, knowing that I wouldn't be able to work effectively with that. But I already worked with translations, so I slowly started to translate books related to theology. So that was a way for me to keep the theology alive. But eventually, it came a moment where I realized, I mean, I have a theological calling, and I need to go back to it. And one of the things that also affected me was to see the political reality in Brazil and how much the Christian faith was being manipulated
Mhm.
for the current president to be elected. That made me really concerned. And I thought I had to come back and
Mhm.
do the master's degree as part of this intention to help people understand the Christian faith in a more critical way and not be so manipulated.
What was the moment you mentioned you realized like you're almost kind of like pushing this away, like, no, I don't want to do this, I want to do something else, but then it kept bringing you back. What was that like, and what finally made you say, not finally, but what made you say like, okay, like I give in basically, okay, like you win, all right? Like what was that? What happened?
So I got hired to do the simultaneous translation for Christopher West, one of the biggest theologians that knows about theology of the body by
Mm-hmm.
Pope John Paul Pope John Paul II.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he came to Brazil, and I came to Brazil. So I was in Argentina, and I came to Brazil just to translate for this event that he was here for. And theology of the body was one of the things that most inspired me to choose theology as well when I was in high school. And so this whole experience spoke to the first, like the reasons why I chose theology in the first place. And then right after that event, there was a theology congress at the university that I went to about theology and literature, which it's two things that also really just enchant me.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the middle of all that, like everybody that would meet up with me, and I hadn't seen them for a while because I was in Argentina, everybody would be like, you need to come back. You have a special gift. Like the way you think theology is outside the box, and we need that. And it was just,
These were friends in Brazil then who were saying that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I was just, okay, God, you win.
What influence did theology of the body have on then of your, and for people who don't know, do you want to say a couple of sentences or just a brief background on that? And then what effect did that have on you picking this path? Kind of maybe your beginning not ecological conversion, but your beginning like, okay, I'm gonna go down this route.
Mm-hmm. Well, theology of the body is usually, when we say it like that, people immediately remember John Paul II, who for about 4 years, during every general audience on Wednesday, he delivered these catechesis about the divine plan for human love. And so it's a really thick book now when you see it all compiled, and is this very intrinsic, this very complicated and like complex theological kind of masterpiece about reading Genesis 1 through 3 as part of God's intentions for creation, and understanding that for us to live today and know how our bodies are gifts how our sexualities are gifts and how we can live those according to the sacraments in the church. I found out about theology of the body by John Paul II when I was in the end of my high school years, because I had my first relationship, and my boyfriend was like, he was baptized, but he didn't practice the Catholic faith. And so we came into this tension of, I wanted to wait till marriage. He didn't. So I had to start dealing with these things. And then when I finished my bachelor's degree, I had this whole other view about theology of the body, because I realized that there is the theology of the body by John Paul II, but there's also a lot of theologies about the body in different areas of theology, because theology is it's a universe. There are very different ways of dealing with that. So now in my master's degree, I'm doing theology of the body, but from the Latin American theology perspective. And it ends up being very different. Yeah.
Really different from the Christopher West that has become so popular. It's different than that.
Yes, because I think the main difference is that the premise, like the main concern of theology of the body that comes from John Paul II, is the moral concern of how to deal with our bodies and how to live out our love through our bodies. And meanwhile, the Latin American perspective is more concerned with the social reality of our bodies, because that's also related to how Latin American theology came to be. Very concerned with the fact that, we are the biggest Catholic and Christian continent in the world, but we're also the most, how do you say, with the most difference between poor people and rich people.
The inequality.
Yes, exactly.
So then how, like you said, theology, you can kind of go a number of different routes. How did why did you feel the need or the calling to pivot, I guess, towards caring for creation and involved the global Catholic climate movement, and maybe like when Laudato Si came out, and that was just kind of like, it was everywhere. And then just kind of go back to there. Why go this way then? Why kind of, pivot to creation care?
I think Laudato Si really shows what I always missed in the theology of the body of John Paul II, that is the interconnection of it all, to understand the body as an integral reality. And it's interesting because if you go to the Vatican website to access Laudato Si, and you do Control F to find the word body, there are a few paragraphs where Pope Francis speaks specifically about that. Right in the beginning, I think it's on paragraph number 2, that he talks about how we forgot that our own bodies are made from the earth. And so I think as I started understanding the depth of Laudato Si, it immediately spoke to how I understood theology of the body as this bridge between all the different dimensions of human reality and how we're called to live this this life in abundance that God has promised us. And the more I research about it, the more I realize that really, first of all, the basic, right? We are our bodies. We don't have a body. And we depend on creation to have a dignified and a healthy life. And it's really all related. And if we don't take care of it, then if we don't take care of our bodies, we get sick. If we don't take care of creation gets sick, which makes us sick. And if we don't take care of creation, we also affect the people who are already the most vulnerable as bodies. The bodies who most suffer are the ones who also are the most affected if we don't care for creation. So with all that, I think it's just Laudato Si really gave me the link that was missing for me to work the body in a more wholesome way in theology.
It kind of connected it all then. Like you had different parts, but Laudato Si brought it all together for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does you're working on your master's, you mentioned, or we were maybe talking before. And what are you focusing on there, and what do you plan to do after that in regards to theology and creation care and all that great stuff?
So my thesis is, like the title is, that the body is what unites us. And I'm going to be working from an theological, anthropologic perspective of how the body is like it's the backbone of all theology in Latin America. Because, as I said before, the way Latin American theology came to be, and especially Latin American liberation theology, it came to be because of this concern for the people who are oppressed and who, they suffer violence, they suffer injustice, they suffer hunger in our continent. And so the church in Latin America has this mission of bringing life in abundance and liberation from these injustices to these people who are the ones who most suffer. And so the body is always the backbone for all that, because it's the body who suffers. And so I'm going to be working a lot in that perspective. But I mean, I'm about to finish. I'm supposed to finish, to turn in my thesis by February. I'm very behind in my writing. And I still don't know what I'm going to do afterwards. And to be honest, whenever I try to think about what to do, I really want to dedicate myself more to the global Catholic movement, because I see it as a concrete way that I can put my theology into practice in a way that reaches people. Because I think theology is still something that has a hard time dialoguing with just normal people. And sometimes we use way too many concepts and reference to things that people aren't really connected to. And I think GCCM, like helping out with the activities in GCCM, I think it's a way for me to find a more effective way to put my theology into practice.
Yeah, more like tangible rather than like theoretical.
Yeah.
Backing up, I was just thinking, when you were in Argentina and then you moved back to Brazil and then went down this path, and you said people were saying, yeah, you should come back. Yeah. But I mean, people probably give you free advice all the time when you were in Argentina. But so what was it about that trip or that time that really made you think like, okay, I'm like giving in kind of, I will do this. What specifically like happened that really turned it for you?
So I think it's part of this bigger context that I've always had a very privileged life, very different from the majority of people in Brazil. And when I finished my bachelor's degree, and I was very influenced by Latin American theology, having this more critical social perspective of how my life was and how the majority of people in Brazil live and how different that is, that I felt it was important for me to move back to Argentina and really just stop once and for all my financial dependence on my father, because he was always like my safety net. So I never had financial problems because, I always had that safety. I never had to survive. I always could just live and do whatever I wanted because I knew that I wouldn't have any financial problems. And when I moved back to Argentina, I decided that was going to be my step to be independent and to really try to make my own living. And so I went with very little money. And I had to start from zero, basically. And I started like trying to find jobs. I worked for a while as one of those people in the airport who do surveys.
Nice, yeah.
It was a very annoying job, actually, because nobody wants to take surveys when you're in the airport.
Yeah. Let me stop and talk to you while I'm late for my flight. This is perfect. Yeah.
And then so that the time I spent in Argentina by myself and trying to make my own path made me even more sensitive to this difference of the privileged life I had. and how it's different when you have to struggle to make a living. And nothing that I did seemed to really make sense, I guess. I mean, I don't really know how to explain, but it's just that whole context made me realize that if I was gonna strive to survive, it had to be through theology, because theology is what I like to do. And so I'm not going to kill myself trying to do service at the airport when I can be trying to kill myself doing theology, but it's gonna, at least it's gonna give me that sense of purpose and of service. You know, it's not gonna be, because that's another thing as well. I think I was very selfish about the way I carried out my life while I was in Argentina during that time, because I was just concerned about myself, about trying to make sure I had everything. And then going back to theology, it's a way for me to think, okay, how can I then live for other people, bring theology for other people, and not just think about theology for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're going to be working, do something you really think makes a difference too, and that you feel like you need to do as well. Yeah. Well said. Well, thank you, Susie, so much for your time. It was fantastic talking with you. I'm so glad. Igor, shout out to Igor. Thank you for the suggestion. I'm sure he's listening, or he will be listening. So,
yeah. Thank you so much.
I'm sure we will talk again. Happy Advent and Merry Christmas to you and your family.
You too. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to everyone listening. I'm so happy. I'm so thrilled with this because I'm a big GCCM fan. I've been translating the blog posts about the podcast, so I'm accompanying everything. Very excited about
there you go. Well, you can be a copy editor on this one too, then.
Yeah.
So check the facts. So very good. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.